Have you ever walked into a room and felt the air sicken, as if your presence had turned on a spotlight no one asked for? There's an invisible price to being the sensitive person. When your clarity arrives, the masks around you start to itch. In the next few minutes, I want to show you why this happens and how to turn that friction into direction without extinguishing your flame. Perhaps you recognize the scene from work, where upon suggesting a simple alignment, someone smiles on the outside and seethes on the inside. The conversation continues, but there are sideways giggles, messages answered without urgency, small stones in the shoe that weren't there before. It's not drama, it's psychic mechanics. Your light touches parts the other doesn't want to see, and this uncomfortable revelation seeks a culprit. Usually, they choose you. At home, the script changes, but it's the same act. You offer a listening ear, a welcoming one, and help name what's confusing, and the following week comes the provocation. You complicate everything because you feel too much. The paradox appears again, calling for warmth for cold hands, and at the same time, curtains for the light. Those who carry a flashlight unwittingly become mirrors of what has remained unintegrated. Ultimately, it's not about being good or bad, strong or weak. It's about openness. Every gift is an opening, and openness without management becomes a leak. Those accustomed to living behind thin curtains find the wide open window strange. The draft disturbs papers, makes noise, and spreads the smell of what was stored. When you arrive, the room breathes. And breathing sometimes hurts. If you've ever considered lowering your voice, apologizing for noticing too much, or practicing indifference to fit in, hold on. You don't need to mutilate your gift to reduce friction. You need to modulate it. Today, I'll give you a simple map, a concrete metaphor, and 3 tools that fit in your pocket. In 60 seconds, you'll recognize the signs that a blessing has become a burden and how to return to paying with the credit of conscience, not the debit of self-effacement. When you don't learn to modulate your own sensitivity, the bill comes in the form of exhaustion. The day ends and your body remains awake, as if the internal flashlight had been left on in your pocket and was now burning your thigh from the inside. Your head replays conversations, searching for places you overindulged, places you perceived beyond what was agreed upon, places you carried things that weren't yours. Sleep becomes shallow, every noise becomes an alert, and the next morning begins with a lack of attention. At work, the toll shows up as distraction and self-doubt. You catch micro-expressions, correct course before everyone else, and paradoxically, feel like you're always a little off. With each adjustment you make for others, you shift an inch from your own center. By the end of the week, meters add up. Deliveries continue to come, but without the same brilliance. The talent that should illuminate has become a beacon pointed at your eyes. At home, the sensitivity that creates intimacy also creates relational fatigue. You welcome, translate emotions, find words when they're lacking, and discover you've reserved only crumbs of silence for yourself. The heart learns to conserve presence like someone rationing water in a drought. Take a sip, take 2, then hide the bottle. The feeling of always being on duty erodes the simple joy of togetherness. In the larger social world, a sophisticated isolation sets in.
You remain kind, respond to messages, participate in the group, but with your soul hidden. Discreet cynicism emerges, the irony that protects, the technical smile that leaves no trace. The more you perceive, the less you feel you can be perceived without becoming a public utility. So you withdraw, and the world loses its texture. There's also the subtle cost of the body tightening. Shoulders rise like shoulder pads, jaw brushes against tooth, breathing shortens without asking permission. The nervous system lives on edge, and any request becomes a siren. An open window brings light and noise. Without control, you try to choose between brightness or rest, when the real problem is regulating the opening. And behind it all, identity confusion grows. After so many projections land on you, it becomes difficult to differentiate perception from paranoia, caution from control. The gift, without discretion, begins to exact emotional and spiritual tolls. The result is predictable. Less confidence, less presence, less of you where it matters most. There's a simple rule that organizes everything that follows. Every gift is an opening, and opening without management becomes excess or lack. Opening too much blows out the image and leaves you vulnerable to noise. Closing too much dulls the brilliance and isolates you from the signals that matter. Mastery isn't choosing an extreme, it's learning to modulate the transition between them with situational awareness. Think of it as a trainable skill, not a fixed trait of your personality. When you see the lever, friction stops being destiny and becomes fine-tuning. To make this lever visible, we'll use a single metaphor throughout the episode: the iris of a camera. When the iris opens too wide, everything looks blown out. When it closes too much, the scene darkens and you lose detail. Its sensitivity is the sensor that captures light, and contexts change the scene. That's why the same presence that inspires in one setting can be disturbing in another. The promise is clear. We'll return to this metaphor at the end and pay it forward, showing how adjusting the aperture changes the portrait of your life, not just the theory. Before applying the metaphor, a practical glossary is in order, so no one gets lost in the jargon. Shadow is the set of parts that you or the other person cannot accept right now. Projection is when these parts are seen in you and treated as if they were your own. A limit is not a hostile wall. It's a clear edge. It defines where your garden ends and the sidewalk begins, who can step on it, and under what conditions. When you hold this lens, you realize that your light can reflect without absorbing what isn't yours, which restores freedom of choice in difficult encounters. See how this works in a common work scenario. You suggest an alignment, and the room reacts with a tense smile. The room's irises are closed out of defense, and yours arrives open by nature. If you open them further to convince, the image explodes and resistance grows. If you close them out of fear, they darken and you betray yourself. Modulating here means slightly decreasing the internal opening, speaking more slowly, asking a question that restores agency, and letting the room's eyes adjust to the light without feeling invaded. Now bring it closer in an intimate conversation. The person you love seeks warmth, but becomes irritated when your clarity illuminates corners they'd rather keep dark. Internally, friction begins with a small stimulus, like an ambiguous request in chat. The body lights up, breathing shortens, attention sticks to the subtext, and the mind formulates a quick story: I'm too complicated. The decision comes disguised as maturity, giving in once more, speaking more softly, adjusting on one's own. But the nervous system registers a loss of territory. This stimulus, emotion, attention, narrative, decision cycle is the track down which the gift slides until it becomes a burden, and it is on this that we will move forward. In relationships, the typical scenario is the complement with a barb. You suggest aligning deadlines, and here, good, but do you have to be so sensitive? The face smiles, the subtext bites. The dominant emotion is shame, which shrinks posture and prolongs the silence. Attention is fixed on possible rejection. The internal story dictates that it's best not to complicate matters, and the final decision is to withdraw from the center of the conversation. Without realizing it, you're teaching others to treat you as a buffer, not a reference. At a systemic level, context reinforces noise. The always-on culture and algorithms that reward reactivity unleash notifications and informal demands, increasing your iris's exposure. The more clarity you offer, the more people seek you out for just a minute, and the invisible cue creates a structural bias. Your sensitivity becomes free infrastructure. As the mechanics repeat themselves, emotions saturate, the narrative becomes belief. I'm a resource. not a person. And the decision is to accept the role out of exhaustion. This escalation activates archetypes that seem noble but drain. The wounded healer transforms all other people's pain into a mission. The anima/animus turns their depth into a magnet that both attracts and irritates. The martyr learns to negotiate value with self-annihilation. In the mirror of these figures, you confuse compassion with fusion, and the garden's border disappears in the mist of good intentions. The result is an accumulation of yeses that says no to your center, and other people's envy finds ground to turn into predictable passive aggressiveness. Over time, a chemical bond forms between your openness and the environment's need to hide. You enter the room and dim the light for everyone but yourself. They alleviate their discomfort by projecting onto you the excess they don't want to integrate. The short-term reward, apparent peace, avoided conflict, takes its toll in the long term. Shallow sleep, dulled creativity, intimacy that becomes a constant on-call service. When the iris remains permanently open, even beauty hurts the eyes. If you recognize yourself in this climb, hold this wire for the next block. There's no need to amputate the light, just adjust the aperture. In a minute, I'll show you a simple map to locate where you are on the trail and how to descend a step without losing color in the image. The myth sounds elegant because it massages the ego and alleviates responsibilities. If you're the sensitive person, everything becomes easier. You read the room, dissolve tension, guide conversations in the dark. This fantasy transforms a gift into an automatic superpower and hides the cost. As you've been silently hurting for years, and applause often comes with the demand that you operate tirelessly. The belief is seductive precisely because it mixes recognition with escape. It rewards brilliance and ignores the management that brilliance requires. See how the myth fails in everyday life? At the office, you understand people becomes a license to summon you into every difficult conversation, as if empathy came with an infinite battery. When you ask for a deadline, they call you dramatic. At home, your talent for naming nuances is celebrated until clarity becomes a mirror, and mirrors frighten. Then the same person asks for your light and accuses you of exaggeration when the light reveals dust. In a group of friends, you become the official mediator and discover that no one offers you the same care you demand. The myth promises ease, it delivers asymmetry. The necessary reframe is short and uncomfortable. A gift without management takes its toll. Sensitivity isn't a shortcut, it's an instrument. When played without technique, it's out of tune and hurts. What appears to be ease is actually practice combined with self-awareness and limits, 3 elements invisible to the naked eye. The false narrative says, just be more yourself and everything will work out. The true one says, tune your iris, choose when and how to open it. Persisting in this fantasy confuses generosity with eternal availability and transforms vocation into compulsory service. There's also a useful counterexample. People who lack your level of sensitivity but operate with elegance because they master simple opening and closing criteria. They no longer feel more, they modulate better. This proves that the key isn't being an empath or not, but rather having a management protocol or not. When you believe you were born with a free pass, you outsource the practice and abandon the training. When you adopt criteria, you regain choice, even on low energy days. Dispelling the myth restores merit to the method and humanizes the gift. The bridge to the turning point is straightforward. It's not amputation, it's dosage. From here, we'll replace the either all open or all closed narrative with a simple map of extremes and center, with observable signs to help you find your way. Next, we'll turn the arc with the decision that anchors the episode and revisit the initial quote in a new light. Then, we'll enter the practical protocol, step by step, with verb, time, and criteria so that your light maintains color without blowing out the image. This is the beginning of the end of fantasy and the beginning of its conscious management. Here's the map that puts you back in the center without mystery, a simple diagnostic so you can tell in any conversation whether you're opening too much, closing down out of defense, or modulating with clarity. Think of it as a quick check-in before you act. It's not a new theory, it's a framework for what you already feel in your body and see in context. The purpose of this block is to give you a practical ruler, and from there, each adjustment in the next few minutes becomes easier and more testable in real life. The first axis is binary and honest. On one hand, open without a filter until the image bursts. On the other, close defensively until the scene darkens. In the middle, there's the key word, modular, which isn't a bureaucratic compromise, but a lively adjustment of the aperture according to the context and objective. The benefit of naming the extremes is shortening the path from consciousness to action, because you stop arguing about identity and start regulating the iris, one click at a time. The map doesn't choose for you. It gives you back choice, where before there was only reaction. To pinpoint your position, use 2 or 3 observable criteria in less than a minute. If your shoulders are at your ears and your jaw is grinding against your teeth, you've probably opened beyond your current capacity. If your breath has vanished and your speech has become monosyllabic, you may have closed off out of defense. Add to this physical barometer a digital signal, such as active screen time and response latency. When your phone swallows your focus and your response comes rushing out, it's a sign of unfiltered openness. When you procrastinate simple answers for hours, it's a sign of closedness. The center here is visible. Your body slows down a degree, the screen loses priority, and the response comes with a question that restores agency. See this in action. In a meeting, someone jokes, "Too sensitive," and you feel your temper rise. Instead of spewing arguments, opening too much, or freezing, closing, you lower your tone, take a breath, and ask, what would be clear to both of you now? At home, the conversation begins with a request for a hug and slips into veiled criticism. You notice the tension in your trapezius and your finger itching to check notifications. So you decide on a clear sentence and a time limit, letting the light in without invading. When your body and digital barometers point toward the middle, the conversation gains texture and you remain whole. The goal of the map is to let you know where you are and how much to adjust, without grandiose guilt trips or epic promises. When the room calls for more light, you open a point. When the room flickers, you close a point. When everything screams at once, you choose the center as a rule and let your eyes adjust. In the next block comes the turning point with the decision that anchors the episode. From now on, I modulate, recalling the quote from the beginning and opening the first CTA. Then I deliver the practical protocol with verb, tense, and criteria so that each step is testable in the body and visible on the watch. We've reached the point where the metaphor becomes a personal pact. The phrase that anchors the episode is simple and operative. From now on, I modulate. This means I don't dim my light to fit in, nor use it to blind. I adjust the aperture according to the context and purpose of the conversation. When the environment flickers, I don't over-explain myself or retreat out of embarrassment. I adjust a point of the iris, return to the body, and choose a question that restores agency. This decision changes the chemistry of the encounter because it interrupts the automatic flow of stimulus, emotion, narrative, and decision. When I notice the barbed compliment, I don't rush to prove myself or freeze to avoid friction. I name the effect without accusing the person. Remember that the mirror reflects and doesn't assume, and I offer a boundary that preserves the garden. Envy and passive aggressiveness lose their nourishment when my presence ceases to be gratuitous infrastructure and becomes a conscious presence with an edge. The same gift that once drained me now sets the pace of the dialogue. Making this pact is also an act of humility because it reminds me that every light casts a shadow and that I carry it too. Instead of assuming moral superiority because I perceive more, I use clarity to respond better, not to win an invisible dispute. The practical result is less internal noise and more external consistency. I approach as someone who knows how to close and open, and I invite the other to adjust their own iris if they wish. From this point on, the method becomes inevitable because a decision without protocol becomes an intention that evaporates. Now begins the protocol that transforms decisions into habits without creating a factory of impossible to maintain steps. The logic is always the same and applies to any conversation. A clear verb, a short time frame, and an observable criterion that tells you it worked. Instead of trying to be someone else, you apply small adjustments that change the chemistry of the encounter and preserve your light. It's a map you can repeat at work, at home, and with yourself until modulation becomes a reflex of the body, not an effort of the mind. Slow down for 60 seconds with 4-4-6 breathing, counting 4 to inhale, 4 to pause, and 6 to release, until your shoulders drop half an inch and your jaw unlocks. This is a physical criterion because the body doesn't lie. When gravity catches up with you again, speech slows and attention shifts away from the barb. In a tense meeting, do this before responding to the too sensitive person. Your voice gains ground, and you stop proving your worth and return to proposing clarity. A minute seems short, but it's enough time for the internal iris to adjust without losing color in the image.
Cut your input for 10 minutes, choosing one window and one person, with notifications set to 0 until the end. The criteria is simple. If your phone doesn't blink and you don't switch tabs, you've met the cutoff. This prevents your opening from becoming a beacon for the entire street when it only needed to illuminate the table, and reduces the invitation for others to dump their pending issues in your presence. In practice, you move from always available to present enough, which reduces reactive envy because boundaries become visible and fair. Swap your language for 3 hygienic phrases that cleanse away exaggerations and restore agency. Instead of, "you always drain me," use, "I notice," without holding back and need a break. Instead of, "nobody respects me," say, "when the conversation turns ironic, I pause and return later." If "I must be crazy" comes up, replace it with, "my body signaled that I opened up too much." The criteria here is the reduction in negative hyperbole in the next half hour and the improvement in the other person's response thereafter. The speech shifts from accusatory to guiding adjustment, and the encounter gains texture where before there was only noise. Establish a tender boundary in a sentence, such as, "Can I hear from you at 6?" and measure in 24 hours whether the time was respected. Tenderness protects the relationship. The boundary protects your garden. When someone brings the request along with the barb, you don't need to rant or disappear. Propose the time, maintain the silence, and let the agreement work. If the person insists on not fulfilling the agreement, activate the 30-second kill switch, declaring good enough and sending what is already possible, because overly open perfectionism also drains.
The criterion is objective: message sent or task completed, even if without epic brilliance. When these 4 adjustments enter the body, envy and passive aggressiveness lose ground because they can no longer find a flashlight without a cap to invade. On good days, you might only need the first and third. On difficult days, apply the entire sequence and accept that enough saves more energy than flawless. The learning is cumulative. Each time you measure, shoulders, schedule, language, and time, your light remains bright without blowing out the image. In the next block, the iris metaphor returns paid for, with the frame clear and colors preserved, so you can feel the benefit of dosing on the clock. Let's return to the iris. When you adjust the aperture, the image maintains color without blowing out, and the contours of what matters remain clear. The same room that once blinded you with excess now welcomes you with measured light, and other people's eyes adjust to the light without requiring anesthesia. The metaphor pays off here. Open to warm, close a point to avoid injury, keep the center as a dosage ruler. The result is a complete presence that illuminates what is necessary and lets the rest mature in its own time. The benefits appear first in the body. Sleep subsides as the mind stops replaying conversations as if it needed to fix the world at dawn, and the morning dawns with a focus that was previously lost in noise. Energy stops pinging with 1,000 notifications and starts to irrigate a few deep tasks, which restores creative rhythm. At the same time, attention returns to obeying what you choose, not what calls you, and this silent sovereignty is worth its weight in gold. On the clock, the sum is direct: more working hours and less nameless fatigue. In relationships, the light finds the right temperature. Compliments stop coming with barbs because the edge is visible, and the conversation stops using you as a buffer and becomes a space for mutual adjustment. When envy appears, it loses the fuel of asymmetry, since your availability has a time limit and your garden has a fence. You remain generous, but not infinite, and this loving finiteness is what transforms closeness into trust. The mirror continues to reflect. It just doesn't assume what isn't yours. Decisions also take on a new dimension. With your iris adjusted, you choose what's worth full presence and what deserves good enough, without performer guilt or martyr pride. Clarity of dosage organizes priorities, reduces invented urgencies, and restores lightness to important commitments. At the end of the day, there's enough breath to exist outside of work, and that's when life reappears with gusto, without having to pay for your light with exhaustion. This is management skill, not a miracle of temperament. And the opening line of the episode changes its meaning. The light that heals also exposes, yes, but it exposes to the extent of someone who has learned to modulate. Enough to guide, never enough to burn. When you rotate the crown of the iris responsibly, healing ceases to be a collision and becomes a path, and exposure reveals the next step, not anyone's sentence. It is this fine-tuning that transforms sensitivity into direction and ends the cycle of apologizing for perceiving too much. In the final section, I invite you to make this pact public. and bring this practice to those who also need a ruler, a border, and peace. As this episode shed any useful light, leave your public commitment in the comments with a short sentence that reminds you of the pact. I modulate. Take the image of the iris and keep it in your daily pocket, because the practice starts small and needs a visible reminder to avoid getting lost in the routine. Tell us where you tend to open up too much, where you tend to close down out of defense, and what simple adjustment you'll try today, so the conversation becomes a journey, not a monologue. When other people read it, they'll recognize themselves and perhaps find the courage to regulate their own openness too, without confusing tenderness with infinite availability. If this was helpful, subscribe and share it with those who live on a tightrope between healing and self-denial, because this rule isn't obvious and changes the quality of relationships when it's no longer a secret. Remember that modulating isn't becoming cold, it's caring for the nervous system so the heart can stay warm without burning out, and that edges aren't walls, they're well-tended gardens. Go back to these 3 steps when the day gets tough, reapply the verb, the time, and the criteria, and measure in your body whether gravity has found you again. If it has, you're at the center. With each completed cycle, envy and passive aggressiveness lose ground, and your light remains bright without blurring your image. Thank you for walking this far with openness and honesty. The light that heals also exposes, but when you rotate the crown of the iris responsibly, the exposure becomes guidance, not wounding. May this practice restore your sleep, clarity, and the simple joy of being present without paying for it with exhaustion. Thank you for walking this far with openness and honesty. The light that heals also exposes, but when you rotate the crown of the iris responsibly, the exposure becomes guidance, not wounding. May this practice restore your sleep, clarity, and the simple joy of being present without paying for it with exhaustion. If this resonated, comment, I modulate the gift, and tag someone who needs this ruler today. May we spread less brightness that blinds and more light that follows their step. Until next time, take care of your mind, your soul, and your truth. You're not alone on this path. Not anymore.